You're sitting at a lavish banquet in the Palace of Versailles, surrounded by powdered wigs, silk gowns, and the glittering chandeliers of French royalty. The air smells of roasted pheasant and fine wine, and you're about to take a bite of what looks like the most exquisite meal of your life. But then you notice something. The nobleman beside you reaches beneath the table, not for a napkin, but for a small porcelain pot. He lifts his elaborate coat, positions himself over the pot, and relieves himself right there at the dinner table while continuing his conversation about philosophy and art. The lady across from you doesn't even blink. She's too busy scratching at the wriggling sensation in her towering wig, where actual mice have made a nest among the horsehair and pomade that hasn't been washed in 6 months. Welcome to the golden age of European aristocracy, where the more powerful you were, the more spectacularly disgusting your daily life became. This is the story of how the elite turned basic human hygiene into a status symbol of filth, and why the stench of royalty could literally kill you. Let's establish something that will make your skin crawl. The Palace of Versailles, that monument to human achievement and architectural grandeur, that symbol of the absolute power of the French monarchy, had no bathrooms. None. Zero. Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, the man who supposedly said, "I am the state," ruled over the most magnificent palace in Europe, and yet there wasn't a single functioning toilet in the entire sprawling complex. Now, you might think, surely they had chamber pots. Surely they had some system for dealing with human waste. And you'd be right, but not in the way you're imagining. The aristocrats of Versailles had chamber pots, yes, but these pots weren't emptied by discreet servants whisking waste away to some hidden location. No, the contents were simply dumped out the nearest window onto the gardens below. Those famous, magnificent gardens of Versailles that we still marvel at today, they were essentially an open sewer. The fountains weren't just decorative. They were strategic, positioned to wash away the rivers of urine and feces that flowed down the palace walls every single day. When you walked through those gardens, you weren't strolling through a masterpiece of landscape design. You were wading through centuries of aristocratic excrement. But it gets worse, and this is where the class system reveals its most twisted logic. The closer you were to the king's chambers, the more prestigious your position, which meant the more likely you were to relieve yourself in the palace corridors themselves. Courtiers would simply find a quiet corner behind a tapestry or a dark alcove in a stairwell and do their business right there. The palace stenographers noted that the smell was so overwhelming that visitors would faint. Foreign ambassadors would arrive with pomanders, small decorative containers filled with aromatic herbs and perfumes, not as fashion accessories, but as essential survival equipment. They would hold these to their noses just to breathe without vomiting. And the French aristocracy? They thought this was normal. They thought this was sophisticated. They genuinely believed that bathing was dangerous, that water opened the pores and allowed disease to enter the body, so they avoided it at all costs. Instead, they masked their stench with increasingly elaborate perfumes, which created this suffocating, sickly sweet cloud of competing odors that must have been absolutely hellish. The wigs, those iconic powdered wigs that we associate with Enlightenment-era nobility, were crawling biological disasters. Women's wigs could be 2 or 3 feet tall. These towering architectural achievements of human hair, horsehair, and wire frames that took hours to construct. Once built, they stayed on for weeks, even months, because taking them down and rebuilding them was simply too expensive and time-consuming. Inside these wigs, in the dark, warm, grease-soaked environment created by pomade and powder, lice thrived, fleas multiplied, and yes, occasionally, mice would nest in them. Women would use long ivory scratching sticks, delicate tools designed specifically to reach through the layers of hair and relieve the constant itching without destroying the structure. Some women slept sitting upright to preserve their hairstyles. Others used special pillows that supported the neck but left the wig suspended in air. And all of them, every single one, lived with the constant crawling sensation of insects feeding on their scalps. Men weren't any better. King Louis XIV himself was notorious for his personal hygiene, or rather the complete lack thereof. Historical records suggest he bathed perhaps 2 or 3 times in his entire adult life. His physicians actively discouraged bathing, convinced it would weaken his constitution. Instead, he would be rubbed down with cloths soaked in alcohol and perfume, a process that did nothing to actually clean him, but did create a chemical smell strong enough to temporarily mask the biological reality underneath. His courtiers followed his example because to do otherwise would be to suggest the king was wrong, and suggesting the king was wrong about anything could cost you everything you had. So they festered together in solidarity, each trying to out-perfume the other, creating an olfactory nightmare that modern noses literally cannot comprehend. The medical community of the time wasn't just complicit in this horror. They were actively promoting it with theories that sound like they came from a fever dream. The concept of miasma, the idea that disease traveled through bad air and foul smells, was taken to its logical extreme. Doctors believed that the body's natural oils and secretions created a protective barrier against illness, and washing them away would leave you vulnerable. They prescribed various powders and pastes to be applied to the skin, never to be washed off, just layered on top of previous applications until you were essentially wearing a crust of accumulated product. Some of these concoctions contained lead, mercury, and arsenic, which meant that aristocrats were not just filthy, but actively poisoning themselves in the name of beauty and health. Women would apply white-laid face paint to achieve that fashionable pale complexion, not realizing that the lead was absorbing through their skin, destroying their organs, and literally driving them mad. The famous beauty spots, those little patches of silk or velvet that became such a trend, they weren't just decoration. They were covering up the syphilitic sores and smallpox scars that were epidemic among the upper classes. The sleeping arrangements reveal another layer of this biological nightmare. Bedbugs were so common in aristocratic bedding that they weren't considered a pest problem. They were just part of the furniture. People would wake up covered in bites, and rather than change the bedding or clean the mattress, they would simply move to a different part of the bed the next night. The very wealthy would have multiple beds in different rooms and rotate between them, giving each bed time to rest and allowing the bedbug population to die down before using it again. The mattresses themselves were stuffed with straw or wool that was never cleaned, never aired out, just left to accumulate years of sweat, dead skin, and whatever else was happening in those beds. When someone died, and people died constantly because medicine was medieval, even in the 1700s, a mattress would sometimes be burned not out of sanitation concerns, but because people believed the mattress had absorbed death and would bring bad luck. The bed frames, the curtains, the pillows, those stayed, complete with whatever microscopic horrors they contained. Dining was its own special kind of revolting. The elaborate multi-course feasts that we see depicted in paintings and films, those meals could last for hours. And throughout the entire ordeal, people were belching, farting, and yes, urinating into portable chamber pots beneath the table without any attempt at discretion. It was considered rude to leave the table, so if nature called, you simply handled it where you sat. The chamber pots were checked periodically by physicians because urine color and consistency were considered important diagnostic tools. Your doctor might literally examine your piss pot right there at the dinner table and announce to everyone present that your humors were out of balance. Women wore elaborate gowns with multiple layers of skirts, specifically designed to conceal the chamber pot they carried beneath them. They would excuse themselves, step into a corner or behind a curtain, and relieve themselves while still technically in the same room as everyone else. The rustling of skirts wasn't just the sound of fabric moving. It was the sound of porcelain being positioned and then, well, used. The sexual practices of the aristocracy added another dimension to this cesspool of humanity. Venereal diseases were rampant, passed around the royal courts like trading cards. Syphilis was so common among the nobility that having it was almost a status symbol, proof that you were important enough to be sleeping with other important people. The treatments were somehow worse than the disease. Mercury was the standard cure, administered through various horrific methods, including fumigation, where the patient would be locked in a box with their head sticking out, while mercury was vaporized inside, forcing them to breathe the toxic fumes. This would cause excessive salivation, sometimes several pints of saliva per day, which was considered a good sign because it meant the treatment was working. In reality, it meant the patient was being slowly poisoned. Their teeth would fall out, their gums would rot, and their brains would be damaged. But hey, at least they were doing something about the syphilis. The irony is that the lower classes, the peasants and workers who couldn't afford perfume and elaborate wigs, who bathed in rivers and streams because they had no choice, were actually healthier than their supposed betters. They died young from malnutrition and overwork, certainly, but they weren't marinating in their own waste products while poisoning themselves with cosmetics. The aristocracy had convinced themselves that their disgusting lifestyle was a mark of sophistication, that their refusal to bathe was a sign of refinement, that their tolerance for living in what was essentially a gilded sewer was proof of their superior breeding. And they maintained this delusion right up until the French Revolution, when the unwashed masses quite literally dragged the perfumed elite from their palaces and introduced them to the guillotine. Maybe the revolutionaries weren't just angry about inequality. Maybe they were just tired of the smell. The Palace of Versailles today is cleaned and sanitized, restored and preserved, and millions of tourists walk through it every year, marveling at its beauty. But if you could travel back in time, if you could experience it as it actually was, with the stench and the filth and the biological reality of thousands of unwashed bodies living in close quarters, you'd be running for the exit within minutes. The golden age of European aristocracy wasn't golden at all. It was crusty, crawling, and absolutely revolting. And the people who lived it thought they were living in paradise.